My name is Heather Slusser, the Extension Agriculture Educator in Marathon County. Today, I am joined by Dr. Matt Akins, Extension Dairy Specialist and Assistant Scientist in the Department of Animal and Dairy Sciences, Dr. Jennifer Van Oss, Animal Welfare Specialist with the UW-Madison Extension Department of Animal and Dairy Sciences, and Dr. Diane Mayerfeld, the Sustainable Agriculture Coordinator for UW-Madison Extension. Today, they are going to speak with us about the fact sheet that they co-authored dealing with hot weather in grazing systems. Matt, could you speak with us about why it is important to provide cattle with plenty of clean, cool drinking water during times of heat stress? And what recommendations do you have for farmers to provide cattle with water?
The main reason we need to think about water, especially during the times of heat stress, is that animals will increase their water intake. So they're going to increase how much they're drinking. Especially out in pasture, they're more exposed to the sun, more exposed to that heat stress than, say, cattle that are indoors, that have fan ventilations, some kind of cooling mechanism. So we really need to pay attention closely to animals on pasture to make sure we have adequate water intake. Some things to consider is how far away you have water sources when they're out on pasture. So if their water sources are fairly close to where they're grazing, less than 600 feet, the animals will come up to with the water more individually or in smaller groups. So you can have maybe a smaller tank than if you have a water that is further away, over 900 feet, they need a larger tank because those animals are going to come over in larger groups or even the entire herd at one time. So you have to make sure you have enough water there that the animals aren't going to drink the entire water tank and not refill, so that the animals aren't waiting around for that water to be available. Those are two things you got to consider: is how far away and then the size of the tank. And then some other options as far as trying to increase water intake is having water available at the parlor. Because generally animals will drink quite a bit of water after milking. If you're using stream access, there's also some things to consider with that, with trying to restrict how much stream access they have. So you might want to fence off part of that stream so you're not damaging the stream bank. And also maybe doing some renovation of that. And the NRCS has a lot of good resources on that. And
Jennifer, could you tell us why it is important to provide cattle with shade, and what are some options available to farmers?
It is very important to provide cattle with some kind of shade resource, and this is for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's a very effective way to prevent additional heat gain from solar radiation. So cattle gain heat from their environments through a number of different sources and mechanisms. Blocking that solar radiation makes sure that the cow can then dissipate heat rather than gaining additional heat while she's still attempting to cope with that heat stress. Otherwise, you're fighting against this natural process that's making the cow even hotter. And in addition to that, numerous studies have shown that shade is an extremely important resource from the cow's perspective. So research has shown that they highly prefer shade and they will seek it out. It's part of what we call their natural behavioral repertoire. And we even see this in their behavior indoors, where they'll seek out shady spots. So it's very important, not only from preventing heat gain and reducing heat stress, but also for their welfare, because it's something that they've shown us is very valuable to them. And there are a number of different options for providing shade. So the first would be through shade structures. And ideally, these would be portable to allow you to rotate them as you're grazing your animals. Research has shown that shade cloth that blocks a greater percentage of solar radiation is more effective and more attractive to cattle. In addition, if you do have buildings or barns, you can take advantage of those and let the cows stay inside during the day, where not only are you blocking the solar radiation, but you can also provide supplemental cooling in the form of fans or soaking. And by doing this, you can then let the cows back out in the evening and they can graze when it's cooler out. And furthermore, without a roof over their head at night, this allows them to then radiate heat back to their environment. So this allows for better long-term cooling. And lastly, if you have shade trees on site, this is another option to take advantage of natural features in your environment, and cows are highly attracted to shade from trees.
Diane, what management considerations are there when we do graze with trees?
That's an excellent question, Heather. Trees are a wonderful resource for cattle and definitely improve their welfare through shade as well as through other things. But there are a lot of things that the farmer has to balance. One thing is that unlike portable structures, a tree stays in place. If you only have 1 or 2 trees in a pasture, you'll get the cows using the shade under that tree a lot, and they'll congregate there. You'll get a manure buildup there, and you're not getting enough manure distribution to the rest of your pasture. You get bare spots, and you can even get increased transmission of mastitis because they're all lying down in each other's manure. So that's one consideration. The other consideration is that if you allow your cows access to a woodland, the soils in woodlands tend to be a little delicate compared to pasture soils and are quite susceptible to compaction by the livestock. It's particularly important that you carefully manage your rotation. In terms of using trees as a shade source to minimize heat stress, one of the things we really want farmers to do is to plan ahead and to reserve those paddocks that have shade for the hot days. Also, the deeper the shade, the slower the grass will be, typically to recover after a grazing. So you have to build in a little bit of a longer recovery time in your grazing system for your shaded areas. Compaction, in addition to harming the trees, will decrease infiltration of rainfall. If you allow those wooded areas to become compacted, you can get problems with runoff, with erosion. We really encourage farmers who are using trees for shade, which is a wonderful thing to do, to manage the use of those shaded areas very, very tightly.
Diane, what changes in handling procedures should farmers consider adapting in times of heat stress?
It's a little bit like the use of shade in that planning ahead is very helpful. Divide handling into sort of 2 groups. There's the daily handling that you have to do all the time, which is bringing your cows in for milking and letting them go out again. And then there's handling of special events, whether it's a vaccination or whether it's artificial insemination or whatever it might be. To the extent possible, if you can look at weather predictions and avoid those additional handling procedures in times when it's forecasted to be very hot, that's very helpful, because handling is another source of stress, and particularly those unusual kinds of handling that you don't want to layer on top of heat stress. That's one step. Then in terms of your daily handling, like bringing them from the pastures to the milking parlor, there are kind of 2 things to consider. One of them is you can shift the timing. So if you bring them in for milking earlier in the morning and a little later in the evening, you're doing that at times that are not quite as hot as if you're doing it, say, at 4 p.m., which is pretty much one of the hottest times in the day. The other thing is, to the extent that you can choose paddocks that are closer to the parlor, they're not having to walk as far. Again, think about a human. If you have to walk farther in the heat, that's very stressful. Those are a couple of items that we really recommend.
Thank you for being with me today and sharing this valuable information about your fact sheet.